Hello, are you wondering if you might be burnt out, or perhaps if you are heading that way? Are you feeling overwhelmed, stressed, anxious? Have you got sleep issues? Join me today as I speak with Claire Platt. She has been in education for over 30 years and she has had some very significant senior roles, and she has a really interesting perspective on burnout and even what it really means. So, hello, Claire. Thank you for joining us today.
Good morning. Nice to be
Uh,
here.
Thank you. Do you want to start by just telling people a little bit about you?
Okay, thank you. So, I am a leadership coach and education consultant. I've been doing that for just over a year. Prior to that, I had leadership roles in a diocese, and I was also director of education in a multi-academy trust in the southwest of England. And prior to that, I've been executive head teacher, been a head teacher, and I've been a teacher. I've also worked for local authorities as a consultant and an advisor. Yeah, and I've been in class, working with children, working with leaders since the early 90s. Yep.
Wow, that's quite a CV.
Yes. Well,
So, Claire, tell us what is your experience of burnout and what does that mean to you?
okay. So, we were just talking a moment ago before you started recording. And I think I said to you, I'm quite hesitant about using the word burnout because I'm not even entirely sure what it means. However, and also I think when you use the word burnout, for me, I associate that with failure. That's probably completely wrong. But I feel like if I've burnt out, then I've failed at doing something. And and also for me, I don't know if burnout almost feels like you're done and that you just become a vegetable and that you can't therefore be successful or happy in your life again. But my personal experience is that about 3 years ago, I was director of education in the trust that I mentioned earlier. And I had noticed over the last sort of few years, sort of living with an increasingly raised level of anxiety. At the time, I was very involved in caring for both of I'd lost my father by this point, actually, but my mum was in decline. So I was kind of very involved with support for her. I had a job which I absolutely adored and loved. I loved working with the team that I worked with, but it was quite demanding. The trust that I worked with is very high performing. So therefore, obviously, we wanted things to go well in the schools. And when hiccups happened along the way, I began to take that personally rather than keeping that in the professional place. And also, I didn't realise it at the time, but I was absolutely entering menopause. And I know that sounds really stupid because I was having hot flushes and all of that, but I hadn't actually taken time to join up the dots and realise that I was going through physical and psychological changes that were probably related to menopause. So I just felt like my plate or my bucket was getting fuller and fuller and fuller and fuller. And then just one day, I just couldn't do it anymore. And it sounds absolutely, nothing dramatic happened. I was just driving home from school and I just started crying, and I got home and I couldn't stop crying. And I said to my husband, I can't do that anymore. Can't go back. And I just knew that I was completely empty. I was completely depleted. And it had been like everything had gone well. I had all these hang-ups about being seen as a failure, as I just said, but my performance management had gone really well. The trust was going from strength to strength and was growing. The Ofsted outcomes and inspection outcomes and, school data was all good. Everything was really positive, but it was just like, I've got to stop. I can't do that anymore. I'm knackered. I'm exhausted. And my lovely CEO spoke to me later that day and said, just take some time, take a couple of weeks off. And I said to her, this isn't a couple of weeks. I know I just need a real proper break. And I also knew myself that if I went back into that role, and this is all entirely my responsibility, that I wouldn't be able to be different. I would be back there at 100 miles an hour, trying to be the superhuman to everyone, trying to make sure that my family was okay, trying to make sure that work was okay, trying to make sure that everybody else had their needs served, and not meeting my own needs. And I think that's really what, if at the time I didn't call it burnout, and I did, and I have got better. But yeah, that's what that was kind of in a nutshell my story.
Wow. I mean, you used words in there like trying to be superhuman. Do you think that's what we do as teachers and leaders in schools?
I think we often do. I think we often do. If you think about the very nature of being a school leader, you're there to serve a community. I very much see leadership as being service. I've always seen leadership, partly because I've always led in Church of England schools, and there's the whole idea of servant leadership in Church of England schools, which is quite a key. So for me, being a leader, in whether it was in school or whether in the trust, was about servant leadership, and that was about serving others, the children, the families, the staff, and then obviously my own family. It was all about trying to do what other people needed. And I was the worst person. I never went to see the doctor until something was really bad. If I had a rash or something, leave it until, till it was ridiculous, or, what I mean? I never ever took time out to look after myself, because that isn't how I saw my role as a leader. I saw my role very much as being about serving the community, and also that was really rewarding. It's an amazing job. Leading a school, leading a trust is an amazing job, and I absolutely loved it. And when you're making a difference, a positive difference for children, for young people, when you're leading a happy team and that they're flourishing, then that's incredibly rewarding. But yeah, I feel like leaders they deplete themselves, because they're doing, the late night meetings, the early morning breakfast meetings. They're worrying about their staff or their children. They're hearing horrible disclosures sometimes. There's pressure from the local authority or from the trust. So I feel like that's exactly how leaders live. I feel like they live with a high level of stress and pressure, and tend to put everyone else before themselves. And you do have to a certain extent, be quite good at being a superhuman. I know you like that word.
Well, it worries me a little bit, actually.
I know
I
it's
guess,
not right. I know it's not right.
yeah.
And, my newer perspective, having, recovered from that. And I joke, as I said, I'm a leadership coach, and I coach leaders, some of whom show this similar behavior to me. And I joke about, being ill with people pleasing. That people pleasing tendency can
Wow.
be really, really negative, because if you please everybody else all the time, you will never actually succeed, because you can't please everyone all the time. But B, you'll become really depleted. So actually, we do need to learn, and I have learned, thankfully, strategies to offset that, to balance that, and to avoid that exhaustion, or the burnout, the word that you used, the word we've been discussing, because otherwise it can absolutely do, it can be really bad for you.
Yeah.
You've got to be putting those self-care protective factors in place.
Yeah. I've Googled and I've researched burnout and what it means. And, there are so many different definitions, there's so many different symptoms. And when I saw the doctor myself, I was having, I thought I was having a heart attack. I had numbness, I had loss of vision, and that's very, very different to other people who say they were crying and they couldn't sleep, and they lost a lot of weight, things like that. Everybody is so different. So it's a very difficult sort of phenomenon or symptom. There's not one symptom for it. And I think the key for what you've talked about is the feeling of failure that comes alongside that sort of that almost that loss of a passion, because so many of us just love the job. So if you'd known what you know now, what would you say to your old self 5 years ago? What would you be telling yourself 5 years ago?
I think I do have the opportunity to practice this with, as I said, with clients. I absolutely really strongly believe in two things now: boundaries and self-care. And again, I think there's all sorts of connotations about the whole kind of self-care thing as that as being very kind of hippy drippy and all of that, but actually it's so essential. So I now have much clearer boundaries. So I was the sort of person, leader, that would be checking my emails in bed. I mean, it was absolutely appalling having the phone beside me. I was not sleeping well. I hadn't slept well for a long time, and that definitely played a massive part in my ill health. I worked from the moment I woke up until pretty much the moment I went to sleep, or I'd never completely switched off. So I've learned to put boundaries in. I rarely work in the evenings now, and I try not to work at weekends. Sometimes life happens and I do have to work at weekends, but where possible, I try not to. I try to prioritize being able to sleep well. So I have a really good bedtime routine because sleep for me has been significant. I also think, yeah, recognize those symptoms and go and get help. I was absolutely, by the time I saw the doctor, I wasn't perimenopausal. I was properly menopausal. I had no estrogen left in my body. So a lot of those symptoms were actually caused by the fact that I had a really strong, reaction to going into menopause, where I had lots of the symptoms have been helped, not all, but a lot of the symptoms have been helped by me treating the menopause. So I'm not saying that it's for everyone, and I know that not everyone can take it, but for me, I have gone on to HRT. That's helped hugely with my sleep. And in terms of the physical symptoms, in terms of the psychological symptoms, sleep has helped, but also that self-care. So having the evenings off, doing something else. So I love just like switching off in the evenings and doing something different. When I was poorly, I journaled, and I know that's something that you very much advocate, and that was helpful for me to kind of keep a track and keep a sense of perspective, because I think when you get really poorly, like I was and like you were, you don't actually have a rational sense of perspective at all. I think I had absolutely entered into sort of paranoia rather than any form of reality, because I was just so completely depleted and exhausted and knackered and anxious and all of those things. So yeah, I think it's really important that you get the help you need before you crash and burn, really, because we can't do it all. And actually, I know it's a cliche, but it's so true that you can't be there for other people. If that's important for you, if you're not able to look after yourself. So I needed to take some significant amount of time off. I did actually change jobs and went into another job. I took about a few months off, 3 or 4, about a term, and then I went into another job, and I felt a lot better for that time and that change. But it also felt really sad that I'd had to walk away from it, because I absolutely loved what I was doing in schools and the trust, and I still feel, even now 3 or 4 years later, very invested in those schools and that trust. And I'm still a governor actually in one of the schools, and I still do some consultancy work for that trust because I care deeply about their success. So yeah.
That's so helpful. And I suppose a question that comes to me, that I wonder if teachers will be sort of shouting at the screen now, which is what they say to me often, is it's very easy for you. You were a CEO or a leader. What about teachers who are asked to do things, and they tell me that it's as if they're made to feel guilty if they say, no, I can't do that. Or there's an expectation that they're less successful if they can't do as much as they're being asked to do. What would you say to those people?
I think that's really, really difficult. And I do work with teachers in that position as well. My honest answer would be, is they're not working for very good leaders if they're being put in that position. That's my honest answer. And I think that's because of the pressures put on leaders. Leaders are so stressed about accountability measures and everything else that they put more and more onto teachers. But generally, if teachers are in that position and they're being asked to do too much and they can't do it, I think the only thing I could say is be realistic about what you can manage. Do what you can manage and try and communicate as clearly as you can to your leaders why you can't do the other stuff. And if you're still not being successful, well, then you probably, unfortunately, need to prioritize you've got to prioritize your health first, because otherwise you are heading for a burnout. And I don't advocate people going off on long-term sick and all the rest of it. I never did that until my ill health. But if you can't do it, you can't do it. As you can't you can't squeeze any more out of that wrung cloth. So but first and foremost, I would be trying really hard to communicate with leaders, and I would be looking after my own self-care and seeing about whether there is anything I think that's important that we take our own responsibility, which I didn't do. Actually, am I looking after myself here? Am I doing everything I can to make sure that I'm in the best robust place to be able to serve my community, to teach my class, to make a difference? Or am I allowing everybody else's needs to make me into sort of a reactive, exhausted donkey?
Yeah, I think that's so helpful. And, for the leaders out there, asking yourself, are you requesting things of your staff in a way that they can say, actually, I can't manage that right now. So it's in a way that is approachable and there's a trust there for people to be honest. And, if I'm completely open, when I burnt out, I was so passionate about my role. It really wasn't about the leadership, it was about me. It wasn't that I was having expectations that were unrealistic put on me. I was putting them on myself because I was a complete people pleaser and I saw gaps and I wanted to fill them because I loved it and I could see I could make a difference there. So it's not here about a blame game. It's about us looking at ourselves and putting in some strategies to become the best version of us, because even the statistics show that it's so obvious, really. But if a teacher is doing better, the students then perform better. And actually, that's why I love my journal that's just come out, because small, consistent habit changes could have made a world of difference to me as a teacher and a leader. It's so simple in a way, but we do have to start to invest in ourselves and take some action.
Absolutely. And to be fair, I think you're absolutely right. In most cases, it's the pressures we put on ourselves that break us. I think that's absolutely true, because certainly in my case, although the challenge was high and the stakes were high, it was me that was putting on that pressure on myself to be that person, to be that superhuman person for everyone. No one else was putting that pressure on me. It was entirely down to me. And although there may be leaders in schools that want more and more out of teachers, I think we do need to look at ourselves first and think, well, how much of this is me being a perfectionist or a control freak? How often do you meet teachers who are perfectionists and control freaks? Me too. And we actually have to learn. I used to laugh with colleagues in schools. Sometimes you do have to learn to be a little bit slapdash, because it's impossible to be perfect as a teacher. It's impossible to be perfect as a leader. Now, I don't, obviously I want successful schools and I want, children to be, doing the very best they can, but they're not going to get there by having teachers who are really exhausted. So it's learning where you can give yourself a break and where you do need to put your attention. That's really important. And just going back what I've said about talking to your leaders, I'm really not talking about confrontation, by the way. Going in screaming and shouting is definitely not the answer. But just going to speak to your leader as another human being who also has all of their own pressures and so on, and just saying, I'm really struggling with this and I need some extra help. I need some extra time. Most leaders will recognize that. Most leaders will give you some time if you need some time off out of class to catch up with things, or if you need some time just to take extra time at home just to catch up, whatever it might be, they will. It's very few that are completely inhuman and might go, no, crack the whip, you need to do more work. But we do have to take that responsibility of saying for ourselves what our needs are, and also take responsibility for looking after ourselves. We can't expect other people to look after us if we don't look after ourselves to start with.
I love that. Claire, thank you so much. I think there's so many gold nuggets in there. If people want to to be in contact with you, how do they find you, Claire?
So I have a website, claireplattcoaching.co.uk. I'm also on LinkedIn most days, and my profile is my name, I think. So I'd be delighted to hear from anyone who'd like to get in touch.
Okay, that's wonderful. Well, thanks everyone for listening, and thanks Claire for your input. See you next time.
Okay, thank you very much, Rowena. Bye.
Thanks for listening. I hope you took something of value from today. If you want to connect, I'm at rowenahicks.com, or I have a Facebook group, which is Preventing Teacher Burnout. So I look forward to connecting to you at one of those.